Well, well, well. Today, we are talking about projected first overall pick in the 2026 NHL Entry Draft, Gavin McKenna, and a pretty polarizing perspective regarding the Toronto Maple Leafs that currently hold that number one pick. I wanted to turn your attention to what Brian Burke said on the Leafs Morning Take podcast. Take a look at this video clip. He says in it, I would shop that pick hard. Brian Burke wouldn't hesitate to explore the trade market aggressively. Now, I love this clip because Burkie is Burkie, and I love the fact that the hosts on the show give Burke the opportunity to explain his piece, to talk about the state of the Maple Leafs, and the fact that supposedly Gavin McKenna is not the clear-cut number one in this year's draft. And I'll admit, that's a pretty fair point. Like, you could realistically say that there's enough room for doubt with McKenna as a whole that maybe taints the expectation that he is a slam dunk number one overall. Now, is McKenna gonna go number one? Yeah, I think that's probably likely. But the fact is, if you take a look at these rankings over here, I mean, Cam Robinson has Gavin McKenna as number two. Button has him at one, Peters has him at one, but Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News, number two. Ryan Kennedy has him at number two. He's ranked 2 by Sam Constantino, Jason Bukala, and Smart Scouting. And as we are going to talk about in a video later on today's show, there may actually be an avenue to see Gavin McKenna get taken much later in this draft than anybody would have expected. We could be on the cusp of Shane Wright 2.0. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that because I want it to happen. I say that because we have enough people going out there and saying that it's not unrealistic. Anyways, let's dive into some of the replies to this Leafs Morning Take clip. Brian Burke says he would trade the first overall pick from the perspective of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Hey, Brian Burke also said Celebrini shouldn't be on the Olympic team. Has Tyler Biggs been called up yet? Oh my goodness, man. Toronto Maple Leafs fans, y'all don't forget. Big shout out over to Tyler Biggs, a former Toronto Maple Leafs prospect that once upon a time was destined for bigger and better things within the Toronto organization, but who has since retired, last playing professional hockey out of the Kalamazoo Wings in 2018-19. A former 22nd overall pick in 2011 out of the NTDP. By the way, who ends up going to Miami University after getting drafted? That's a pretty interesting choice, but then again, I guess the league was different 15 years ago. Other replies go out there and say, I'm so tired of these dinosaurs in the league. Burke is a good guy, but he doesn't know what he's saying anymore. And then another reply says, oh, he is not the clear number one in this draft. And then there's a post with Gavin McKenna's pre-draft season production in the CHL. He had 129 points in 56 games for the Medicine Hat Tigers, which supersedes what Connor Bedard and Connor McDavid did in their draft -1 years in the CHL. Also got to remind you the fact that generally speaking, I'd say that hockey scoring has gone up over the years, just holistically at the NHL level and especially in the junior level as well. That's not to discredit the 99 points that McDavid had or the 100 points that Bedard had, but I do think it's important to acknowledge the context here. Also the fact that the CHL nowadays is just a point-scoring festival where everybody is getting a whole bunch of points, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the top talents ended up going to the NCAA, just like Gavin McKenna ended up doing. But still, it is a noteworthy part of the conversation. This is the same guy that thought he had a Luke Shen home run draft pick, isn't it? I like Burkie. He was very respectful to me when I met him years ago. However, I disagree. McKenna has more CHL points than McDavid and Bedard, and for the Maple Leafs, they have to keep the first pick and work around building a better defense. Unless you wanted to go out there and use the first overall pick to trade for a defender, right? But then if that was the case, you might actually be competing against the San Jose Sharks because they are also trying to get a defenseman as well. Their second overall pick is very much in the running in this draft season. Heck, if Vancouver was really adamant on moving on from Filip Hronek, I question whether or not a Hronek trade to Toronto for number 1 actually would make sense. Screw Hronek for Morgan Rielly or whatever. How about Hronek for the first overall pick? Let the Canucks get Gavin McKenna and Caleb Malhotra at number 3. That would be a pretty interesting way to start out Henrik and Daniel Sedin's co-presidency or whatever role that is that they're going to have when it's inevitably announced. Yeah, I'm recording this video way before the announcement was made, but with that said, could you imagine the explosion of media coverage that would happen if Gavin McKenna, or at least the draft pick to draft Gavin McKenna, was traded away from Toronto? Whomever it is coming over back to the Maple Leafs would all of a sudden be compared to Gavin McKenna for the rest of their career. If it is Filip Hronek, nobody is going to forget, hey, y'all could have had a franchise winger in McKenna, but you opted for a D-man instead. You opted for a Mitch Marner replacement instead. You opted for this, you opted for that. You could have gotten McKenna. And if McKenna goes on to have the career that some people think he's going to be able to have, especially considering the other guys that have been in this same point production territory in the past, it could spell some pretty big doom and gloom for Toronto Maple Leafs fans and media over the long term. But I do agree, to some extent, that Gavin McKenna is not the unanimous number 1. The fact that there is still room for debate opens the possibility to some of these other names tossing their hat in there. Frank Saravalli famously went out there and said that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to get Ivar Stenberg number 1. And Stenberg is not the same flashy type of offensively leaning guy like McKenna is, but I would say that if you want to talk about who is going to be a better pro, a better hockey player in general between McKenna and Stenberg, I think the answer is pretty clearly Ivar Stenberg. He's more of a mature hockey player, he makes better decisions, he facilitates the play more professionally, you could say. Gavin McKenna has more skill, and at the end of the day, he could end up with more points per season, but that does not dismiss what Ivar Stenberg's capable of. If the Toronto Maple Leafs feel like that difference isn't discernible enough and they don't feel comfortable making a choice of one or the other, then okay, maybe then you trade the pick. Maybe then you trade for a guy whom you know what he brings, a guy who could automatically add value to the Maple Leafs right now. And if that's the vision that John Chayka has for his team, then I would watch out. If John Chayka is taking any advice from Brian Burke, that is. So with all that said, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the idea of the Toronto Maple Leafs trading away the first overall pick and passing up the opportunity to draft Gavin McKenna because he isn't the unanimously ranked number 1 guy? Might I remind you, sometimes the unanimously ranked first overall wingers don't even pan out all too well anyway. I'm thinking about Alexis Lafreniere. With that said, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Brian Burke's comments that he would shop the first overall pick hard? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.